Right now, young men in their late teens and 20s are facing a quiet crisis, one that's reshaping their future and ours. In the US, more than a third of 18 to 25-year-olds are living with mental illness. And suicide is now the second leading cause of death among that age group, with young men making up nearly 80% of those losses. At the same time, fewer men are pursuing higher education. Today, they make up just 43% of undergraduates. That's 2.4 million fewer men on college campuses than a decade ago. And it's not just about the classroom. A quarter of young men say they felt lonely for most of the previous day. And 2/3 admit no one really knows me well. More time alone, more time online, and fewer face-to-face connections are leaving many disconnected at the very moment they need belonging the most. My guest today is Dr. Nate Balfanz. He has spent more than 20 years working with children, teens, and young adults around the world. Together, we're going to talk about what's driving this crisis and how parents, communities, and young men themselves can begin to turn the tide. Hi, Dr. Nate.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy you came on. So you've been working with young men and families for over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Given what you've seen, what do you think is driving this crisis?
Sure. I feel like it's maybe a couple different things. And I don't know if it's so much that I find the young men and the teens or that they find me, because as we know, mental health is largely a female dominant profession. I think it's 75% female practitioners, 25% male practitioners. So more often than not, when I get a parent who's looking for a therapist, especially for their teenager, for their young adult, they're looking for a male therapist. And I just so happen to be a male therapist, and then we just kind of find one another. I think another part of it then too is that, maybe to put a bit of an optimistic spin on it then too, is that I see a lot of adolescent boys as well as a lot of men in their 30s to mid 40s too that are either coming to therapy for the first time, or perhaps they had tried therapy or they were taking the therapy when they were younger, didn't re-engage with the process until they reached a point in their life where they said, you know what, I feel like I need to talk to somebody. And I love to hear that. I love to see a lot of these middle-aged men who come back to therapy, re-engage with me, and are finally open to having a discussion about what's really going on for you right now and what you're struggling with. So I see that as a positive sign. Yeah.
What is going on with it? All the way from 40 down to the teenagers. Why are these numbers so sobering as far as the mental health challenges? It's across all young people, but particularly with the men. I've seen it with my son. My son actually saw Dr. Nate when he was 16. And so he has been able to see Nate's growth throughout the years, and Nate's now almost 20, and he's doing really well. And I think a big part of that was getting him to see Dr. Nate, which was a huge help. He was really struggling with some of his own connections and where he belonged in the world, and having a strong male role model, such as Dr. Nate, I think was the missing link for us at the time. So that's the big reason I wanted Dr. Nate to come on, is because my family, we have experienced it firsthand, how having a strong male role model, whether it be in therapy or otherwise, can make a huge difference in the trajectory of these young men. What is driving the crisis? Is it social? Is it all the online things that we're seeing that we didn't grow up with?
Yeah, I think it's a variety of different things. We know that the hallmark of the developmental stage of adolescence into young adulthood is what we call like a search for identity and acceptance. All right. We're gradually moving away from being within our nuclear family to preparing for world and the life beyond what's in the home then too. So every adolescent, regardless of age and stage, they're in this period right now where they're looking to see, okay, where do I fit in? Who do I belong with? Who are my people? Because as we know, like we are a clan sort of culture then too, and we need to have people that we feel aligned with and connected to. And I think that that's been increasingly more difficult as we've gotten older. As you said, there's the online component to this then too, and like hanging out with people, but are you hanging out with them in person? Are you hanging out with them online? I think another big thing I can remember being a teenager and maybe feeling left out sometimes. I didn't get invited to a party. A girl didn't like me, but she liked someone else. And I was left wondering, gosh, well, I wonder what they're doing over there. All right. They must be having the best time in the world. And I'm over here by myself, bummed out with nothing else to do. So this imaginary audience that everybody was having a really good time and I wasn't, that imaginary audience has become less imaginary because we can peer into other people's lives through social media, through Snapchat, through Instagram. And what we put out there, we put the best versions of ourselves out there. So if we're feeling disconnected in the first place, we're looking online, we're seeing friends hanging out, we're not there hanging out, then we're feeling even more disconnected. So we ask ourselves, what's wrong with me that I don't belong, that I don't fit in? So I think it just magnifies an already inherent struggle of adolescence, which is who am I and who do I belong to?
And do you see that if there's a difference between the female and the male ability to connect, not online, but just within their peer groups? Because there is an emotional gap inherently at that age. Does that also make it wider?
I wouldn't even say necessarily that it's that they can't connect. I think it's just that they will connect in a different way. All right. And on the one hand, if you can emotionally connect, have conversations about your feelings, how you're doing, what you're struggling with, obviously that can be helpful, but that can also be very overwhelming if you're not finding the support that you need to help you work through that. Right. And I don't want to get too caught up in like gender norms and stereotypes and such, but I think for men, for young boys in particular, if you're having a hard time, what are we traditionally taught is to kind of stomach that, put that down, and hide that away from the rest of the world then, because that requires of us to be vulnerable. And I think that there's been this sort of, whether it's culture, whatever it might be, there's this notion that being vulnerable in front of other people is frowned upon or can somehow be used against you in some way. And I think that that's something particularly that adolescent boys and young adults tend to struggle with. I know even from my own experience growing up that I had struggles in that regard.
I think in general, we were talking before we started recording about the generational norms, how they're starting to change. And so my generation, which would be Gen X, definitely no emotions, suck it up, do what you're told. You're supposed to be strong and silent. Your generation then is building up, but still very much struggles with that identity and who is it safe to talk to. And then with my son's generation, I don't think they have any guidelines at all because there's this notion out there, this toxic masculinity. But I think there's also toxic femininity, because what I hear, whether it's online scrolling or just this whole shift towards he has to pay all your bills and he has to do this and he has to do that. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's so hard just to support yourself. This is what we're telling them. No wonder they're retreating. And if they're not emotionally strong and they can't support you in an emotional way and listen to your problems and take care of the kids and, be emotionally invested and do all the chores around the house, I can see why the young men are they're kind of backing off because it's overwhelming. And I don't think they have a strong definition anymore of what's expected of them in this time that they're trying to figure out who they are. Because a lot of younger people are trying to fit a mold at this point, in that younger point. And I don't know if I want that mold if I were them.
Sure.
So I'm very concerned, and I'd like to have more of a conversation about that generational gap of what was taught. It's no one's fault, but we need to look at it so that we're aware of how we can change it based on what it is right now for them in their reality versus what I was taught. Is it because of the vulnerability factor that young men are less likely to open up?
I feel like that's a big part of it. Where I think now more than ever, like the idea of mental health and mental health support is ever present, where we do have campuses that are equipped to be able to provide those support services. We do have discussions in media and pop culture about like what it means to be able to talk and like get therapy and how it's okay. And we don't need to have the same stigma with it, which is great. But if we have not taught our young people how to be able to ask for help in the first place,
that's what I'm talking about.
That's where the gap is then too. So we're here, but if we haven't encouraged them or shown them what it means to actually like knock on the door and be able to communicate, hey, I'm having a hard time with this, either because maybe we were never taught that ourselves or because we've tried to shield our kids from if we struggle with things. We don't set a good model for our children about what it means to ask for help and how that's okay to ask for help.
That's huge. So it really comes from the parents or the community, the modeling that they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
So if they never see their fathers or brothers or uncles ever asking them, are you doing all right? More than just a surface level or what's on football, what's on hockey.
Sure.
You're right. I don't think they know how to step into that or
Sure.
that it's even okay.
Right. Right. The analogy that I often use for parents when I'm having conversations with them about how to best support their kids is, kind of like a Goldilocks sort of thing, where if you as a parent might be struggling with things personally, or maybe you're struggling with things in your partnership with your spouse, and we don't want you to over communicate those sort of things to your child, where the child then feels that it's their responsibility to be able to take care of you. On the flip side of that, we don't want you to under communicate what it means if you're having a hard time with reasons X, Y, or Z. So we want to be able to find something right in the middle where we can model for our children that it's okay to be having a hard time. It's okay to be in conflict with someone, and modeling for them what it means to communicate and talk about what you're having a hard time with, as well as modeling for them what it means to work through conflict and work to repair.
Yeah. There's a difference between using your child as the sounding board as your best friend to work things out, and just letting them know that we all struggle. With both of mine, especially as they've gotten older, I pass on the life lessons that I'm learning in real time. So I might not be like, oh, I'm just having such a hard time, because I don't want them to think they have to parent me.
Sure. Yeah.
Or to be any kind of emotional space for me, because I should get that elsewhere from my peers of kids. But to grow their sense of emotional safety and struggling, I feel like, hey, I was thinking about this the other day, and I relate it to me. I don't ever say you should, because that's the worst thing you can do, is to tell them what to do. But doing that, or maybe at the end say, do you ever feel this way? That now opens up the gap to talk about it in their reality at their age group was appropriate. So I have found that helps a lot. And it's that minor, like, yeah, it's okay. Feel your feelings.
Right. And we want to humanize ourselves to our children.
That's it.
Too. We want our children to have the experience that we're not talking at them, but we're talking alongside of them.
Alongside, not even to them. I'm right here with you. That's made a huge difference in the early emotional growth of the kid, as well as our closeness.
Sure.
They can come to me with anything, and there's not the judgment. I might be having some thoughts in my head, but it doesn't come out. It's a holding space for them.
Right.
And remembering that you're the parent.
Right. Absolutely.
To your friend.
Right. And also keeping in mind too that oftentimes, and I'll tell parents too, how do they initiate this conversation? Or if their child brings something to them that they're struggling with, I tell them, real quickly, and we as parents, we think of our job as healers and helpers. So if our child is bringing us a problem, well, then obviously they're looking for a solution from us. 80-90% of the time, that's not the case whatsoever. All right. So I tell parents to preface a conversation about things that your child might be struggling with by asking them, hey, is this something you're wanting to just kind of vent about right now and share with me and help me hold that with you? Or are you looking for some direct advice? That way it helps to guide the parent to know how they should intervene, as well as helping the child to develop the ability to communicate what it is that they need from other people.
That's a great piece of advice for all relationships.
Absolutely. 1,000%.
Men and women have very different brains. And so especially if we're talking sort of cross-gender, it's really helpful to establish, what are we doing here? And so for men in general, talking to their wives, their coworkers that are female, get that information early, because you could blow yourself up by men tend to want to fix things. They want to fix the problem for you, right? That's how they're helpful. And sometimes that's just not what people are looking for. So in general, especially with the kids, but across the board, kind of interjecting that so you can sort of reframe your thought process of how you're best supporting them.
Right.
Not just go to what your tools are.
Right. How many times, and I've had this experience where I will come home from a hard day, and maybe the cases that I'm working with are particularly hard, maybe out of conflict with a coworker, maybe I'm just overwhelmed with paperwork and other busy work that I have to do. And I'll come home, and if I vent all of those things to my wife, like she can jump into, well, you should just da-da-da-da-da. And I'll do the same for her then too.
I know what I have to do.
Yeah, exactly. It just ends up making you feel more frustrated because I know all those things. I'm just here to complain for a little bit.
Just let me just hold the space for my complaint. That's crappy that you had a crappy day.
There you go.
That's kind of all you need. And then have some dinner, take a breath, and hit the paperwork, whatever. That's the connection part that I think everyone, but it's affecting our young men the most. They don't have that in-person interaction to try to repeat, try to express, okay, this is what we're doing right now. It's very isolated. It's online. It's singular, right? Because it's usually video games or whatever they're sharing doing, but it's virtual. So they're not starting to pick up these cues. Families don't spend that much time together anymore, it seems like. So they don't even see how their parents are resolving or learning to communicate or learning to hold space for each other. They don't see it anymore because we're overscheduled. Everyone's got club this club after school, and you've got AP this. And so I think that's also driving interaction. So can I ask you this for seeing that the young men are pulling back from higher education, which there's a good part, and it could be a valuable part. I don't think that's necessarily all bad. But it's at historic rates. So there's 43% and dropping of men entering higher education now. So women are almost at a 3-to-1. I don't know what that's going to do as far as connection, but having the academic disengagement, do you see that being connected to the mental health challenges?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a couple things that maybe contribute to that. Obviously, as we were talking earlier about the cost of higher education just sort of going through the roof then too. Yeah, you're experiencing it right now. I can think just even personally for me, now I grew up in a small town in central Illinois. All right. And the town where I grew up in, East Peoria, Illinois, was the Caterpillar headquarters of the world. So the tractors and the moving company then. And when I was in high school, there were only a few different things you could choose from. You're either going to college, you were going in the military, or you going to work for Caterpillar. That was it. It was just a very singular track. So if anybody ever asked me, like, what are you going to do next? I just assumed, like, I'm going to university and beyond then. So it's very just, this is what we'll be doing. There's no real options or wiggle room. You're just going to do one of these three things. Now, for better or for worse, I think children are left with like, well, you could go to university, or you could go to an online school, or you could go to community college, or you could go into a skilled trade, or you could take a gap year. Gap year was not even a thing. When I was a kid then too. And not to say that we did it right, but I do believe that it's great that we're trying to meet more children where they're at in their sort of developmental stage and what they're necessarily ready for. But I also think the flip side of that is there's nothing tethering them. So there's so many things and so many different routes that it leaves them almost sort of paralyzed in a way to know, well, I don't know what's next for me. And I don't really have any good direction. There's less of a forced choice about what you're going to be doing next and more of, you can try anything you want, which is great, but also leaves kids more and more confused about what it is that they want to do or what it is that they quote unquote should be doing.
Well, and do you find with the young men that they do become paralyzed and they don't do anything?
Yeah, I think I see that in both young men and young women. And I don't know, again, if it's because I'm seeing primarily men and young adults and adolescent boys, or if that's something that's universal experience for both males and females. But absolutely, I do have a lot of men that I work with and a lot of transitional age youth, that 18 to 25 gap, where they're really just sort of stuck as to like, I don't know what I want to do next. I have really no clue. I guess I could do this for a little bit. I guess I could do that, but I'm not really sure. I think the other thing too is, and we talked about this as well, for me, it was high school, 4 years of college, 2 years grad school, 4 years doctoral program, 10 years of college straight through. I know full well that if I had ever left at any point along the way, I probably wasn't going back. I have a lot of young people that I work with who maybe did 1 year at school, maybe they did 1 year at semester. They came back for reasons X, Y, or Z. And now the idea of either going back or going to a different school or re-engaging in some way seems overwhelming for them and something that they don't feel like that they're necessarily ready to re-engage with. And so then they're kind of stuck. And I also see too, this goes back to that whole idea about like an imaginary audience. Oh, I have so many of those kids in that age group where if they took some time away, they think that every other kid that they went to school with has it figured out and that they're 2, 3, 4 years behind those kids, when really that's not the case whatsoever. So it's this, well, I'm not even going to start because what's the point? I'm going to be so far behind everybody else at this point that why would I even bother? So that's another thing that I see happening a lot in my conversations with late teens and early adult young men that I work with.
Is that I've already missed out on so much. Everybody's graduating and I'm going to go back into my second.
What are they going to say about me? What are they going to think about me? Again, this comes back to that idea, this imaginary audience where like there's this ego-centeredness that we see both in young children as well as in those adolescent young adults then too, that you think that you're that important. And I promise you that you're not. And that's a good thing. It's okay.
I always tell people, look, we're all the star of our own reality show.
Yep.
And so everything is very ego-centered and you think everyone's looking at you. They're not.
Mm-hmm.
They're in their own reality show.
Yes.
So you're just a fragment of theirs.
Yes.
And if we could shift our perception to that, I think people could just try things without worrying about not necessarily the consequences, but if people are even looking at you or thinking about you.
Right.
Because I promise you they're not to that extent that you think they are.
Right. Right. I wish I could have all of my kids in the same room at the same time. Obviously, confidentiality purposes, that is not an option, but I wish I could have them all in the same room at the same time for them to all think, I'm the only one going through this, when in actuality, you're just one of many who's going through something similar to that.
And that's part of the reason I wanted to have to normalize it.
Yes.
Because it's everywhere. Yeah. Whether it's me talking to my clients about their kids or some of the young people coming to me, I think it needs to be put out on the table so we can make some real headway in how we not just parent, but how we support the younger generation, particularly the young men, which, the women, and I did an episode on this last season where we went from how limited we were in our choices because of the laws and the perception to in 1974 was the first time a woman actually could have her own bank account without a male signer. I was like 3.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I didn't really feel it, but our ancestors did. And that women just took off because we kept getting more in Title IX and this. And so the opportunity for young women, they're killing it. So part of that's like getting the push of go do it wasn't available, or certain things have been available for the young men, but they're stalled. And I don't want to see that gap widen. I think it's very detrimental for when they get to adults. There's going to be such a gap.
Sure.
Even as far as choosing partners for relationships. Right. We don't have to get into that now, but I foresee that could be a real problem.
I got a lot of people too they're afraid to take a next step because they always ask themselves this question, well, am I ready? I was like, well, how would you know?
You never know.
You would never know. And the truth of the matter is people go, well, I won't apply for this job. I won't apply for this university until I know that I'm ready. I said, you're never going to get there. I said, you're going to always have a certain degree of doubt or uncertainty or anxiety about whether or not you're ready for those next steps. And in fact, that's a necessary component to be able to take those next steps, is to be able to tolerate that anxiety, be open to the idea that I don't necessarily know how this is going to turn out, and that's okay. I'm just going to keep moving forward. I think everyone, particularly now, wants to think, I need to have every step figured out to know where I'll end, to know where my destination will be. But the truth of the matter is that that's not how the world works, and that's not how growing up works either.
And stepping into something where you might be uncertain, or just stepping into it, just see what it feels like.
Yep.
That's more the encouragement, right? Do it and see what it feels like for you. But you don't know what it's going to feel like unless you do it. And typically when you step on a particular path, there's always going to be crossroads.
Yes.
And so just taking that next step, staying there long enough to figure out if it is for you or not, usually something else opens up. You don't normally go backwards. It's the tree roots. It just spreads.
Right. It's like being in a room with 3 doors in front of you, and you can just sit in that room and just wait the entire time until you think you're ready and you've got the whole map figured out. Or you could just walk through a door and then maybe walk through another door and walk through another door. And then all of a sudden you're exactly where you want to be, at least for then and now.
But I even see that fear of I'm not ready. And the younger kids aren't dating so much. There's the hanging out with friends.
Yeah.
But I think part of that, I'm thinking of that just right now, is that whole, what do I have to offer? Well, you don't have much to offer. You're like 16, 19. You're just, it's the learning to communicate and hanging out. And I try to tell my kids, it's like figuring out, oh, I like that, but I don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yes, you could move on because that's what dating is. Oh, I like that, but I don't. And so you're sort of building your likeness. And so as you get older, when you get to the point where you might want to settle down or have a long-term partnership, you have all of these likes and then you have all these dislikes. You don't have to go through it.
Yeah. You've learned about what you're seeking for in a partner. I think more importantly, this is something that all of us figured out and had to figure out at one point along the way, is who am I in a relationship to? What do I bring to a relationship that helps to make it work? Is also, what do I bring to a relationship that gets in the way then too? So there's only one common denominator from relationship to relationship, and that's you. And you want to take a look at that for the relationships that didn't work out to find one that does. And if you don't have any experience in that regard, and then all of a sudden you're at an age where you're feeling like, I want to find a partner, I want to settle down, I would like to find a mate, someone I would spend the rest of my life with, but you haven't been doing that trial run along the way, then you're very ill-equipped to be able to take those first steps. Because then at that point too, it feels like there's so much riding on it to find just the right person that it makes it even more overwhelming and more anxiety-inducing.
And if you step into that relationship because you think it's time, it's disastrous for the growth of your relationship, potential family, your careers, because that partner is supposed to be that foundational person. And so if you don't have enough data or experience to know whether, oh, this is someone who actually I can't be with the rest of my life, or at least grow together with, I should say, you're in big trouble.
Yes.
Maybe that's why the divorce rates are so high. I don't know. But I'm seeing a lot less engagement, even just from the hanging out, because they're all online. Yeah, it's very concerning for me. What are your thoughts on the ripple effect of this for culture, for as these kids get older?
Let's take like the online hanging out and online friendships. Like, on the one hand, for a lot of kids, that might be a really good, positive thing. Or maybe you did struggle to make relationships and to feel people that you feel connected with in person. And then you find your community in an online space. Right? On the one hand, that can be an okay thing. Now, on the other hand, we don't necessarily know what that online space looks like, because you don't know really at the end of the day who's the other person sitting on the other side of that screen. So, and then also the other challenge too is like, you can stay there and you can create a world that's exclusively online and only online relationships, but there is still a world outside the door that does require of you to go out, to meet, to interact, to play nicely with others. That's not going anywhere. Despite the shifts that we're making more and more towards doing things electronically and online, that's still a required skill set that we need to develop in that childhood, early adolescence period, that we're maybe robbing our kids of an opportunity to be able to do that because we say, oh, well, you could just do this instead and you don't have to do anything else.
Yeah, I think that we're not looking far enough ahead of the choices we're making for our children, what that's going to look like for them, or how the lack of communication skills, just comfortability of being around people. I think partly that's why the anxiety level is so high.
Right. And when you think about like an online world, we're all guilty of this, is it's kind of a manufactured reality then too. You just put this version of you forward that you want people to see. You can edit and go back and forth about how you want to communicate things to other people. And then the problem is, if you only exist in that world where you can reshape and reconfigure how you want to be presented to others, that really impairs your ability to go out into the world and be who you are and show every part of you, and be okay with what some people might like and what some people might not like about you, and still be able to sort of push forward and still,
and that be okay, knowing that you're not for everyone.
Yep.
You still have to be confident that you can just be you regardless. I think that you can only gain that skill set with face-to-face connection.
Right.
And just being around other people. I think it also builds your bandwidth for things you don't like.
Right.
So the other thing I see in young men in particular, their rage and anger emotions are closer to the surface. And I think part of it is when you're on this online world, you get to control everything. Like you said, you can control how you're being presented, but even playing games, blow this guy, do this. You're telling it what to do and it's responding. So that's the online world. You tell it what you want and it gives you what you want.
Yeah.
Not so much out in the real world. And so I think that there's a rewiring of the brain that their expectation is that they're going to get what they want, or people will do what they want, or it's going to turn out the way they want. And they don't have the bandwidth to accept defeat or rejection. And then they're not mature enough to know what to do with that anger.
And to know too, like,
it's okay.
Yeah. And that things are not always going to go your way, whether it be in relationships, friendships, whether it be in romantic relationships, whether it be in your occupation field of study. Things are not always going to go according to plan. And just because they don't, doesn't mean that you retreat. I think we've unintentionally reinforced that idea that it's okay to just pull back and retreat. You never learn that skill of what it means to work through, be flexible, be dynamic, and find another path.
And be uncomfortable.
And be uncomfortable. Yes. Yeah. Somebody wants to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. None of us like to feel uncomfortable.
Growth points are everything.
Yeah.
Even in doing your own work without anybody around, leaning into the uncomfortable is where you get the why.
Right. And I understand this personally as well. Here's a good example. So my son, he's got a mullet, and I love it. It's a combination of my small town Midwest upbringing. My wife grew up in like a nice part of Melbourne, Australia, but still very bogan then too. So it's a perfect sort of divergent or confluence of our two cultural backgrounds then too. And I remember he was 3 years old, and he'd come home from his preschool one day, and he said, so-and-so said that I have girl hair. I've never been so angry at a 3-year-old I was at that moment, because what happened is my protector nature kicked in, and I have this precious little boy that I want to shield him from any bad thing that ever happens to him. And I realized, okay, I need to scale back here a little bit, because if I put him in a bubble and protect him from people saying bad things about him or doing things to him, like, obviously we don't want or plan for bad things to happen to ourselves or to our children. But if we absolve them entirely of having to be subjected to that and being able to work through that, then that's another one of those skill sets that they don't develop because we're too busy shielding them from being hurt, whether being hurt primarily emotionally, and knowing that it's okay and that you can overcome that.
So why did you tell?
Well, I'm trying to think back. Again, I had to take a beat.
A pause.
I had to take a beat because my instinct first was to accompany him to school the next day and say, tell me who it was said that. I did not. And I just tried to normalize, we love your hair.
Do you love
your hair?
That's it. Like, what do you think
like
about
it? Do you think it's girl hair? No, you don't. Then awesome. All right. And you can let them know that I can have any kind of hair that I want, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think reflecting it back to the young people, well, do you think it's bad? Instead of them automatically thinking what someone else thinks must be the truth. It's redirecting them. What's your truth?
Mm-hmm.
And the more you do that, the earlier you do that.
Yes. Yeah.
It really helps them build that identity. That's the formative years of who am I.
Right. And I think too, we don't give children, particularly young children, enough credit for what they understand or for what their ability is to work through conflict. We either jump in too quickly to save them from it, or we don't have conversations about their feelings or their thoughts whatsoever. And so if we're not having those conversations at a young age and stage where their feelings are particularly salient, because young children are very sensory and sentient beings, we're as adults are so caught up in our left brain cognitive talking world that we forget that children are just like emotionally raw. And if we can't help build a vocabulary around that from the start, then that's going to create some problems later on in life. The child is never too young to start putting vocabulary language to the feelings that they're feeling or that they're demonstrating to the outside world. And I think sometimes we forget that because we don't think they'll understand that.
Right. My kids have come to me with descriptions of what they're going through that I hadn't quite thought about. That. My daughter had used the word, we were talking about just downtime. She said that it was hard for her to unlearn toxic productivity.
Yeah.
I was like,
good way to put it.
It was 21. I said, I'm going to use that 3.5 hours. That's really good. Because
Absolutely.
I was trying to tell her that's what she was doing, but she had this term for it.
Right.
So whenever her friends or where she's getting this terminology and she's doing her own work, it makes me really happy because she can put words to these feelings.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it never ends.
Never ends.
I think it's harder for Nate, but he does. He's the kind of kid who will at least talk to me about his feelings. I know that I'm his safe space. But if I can get offended, so this is a story, he was going through his depression. There was a lot of rage. And he would rage out in his room and this and that. And I used to take it personally, like, oh, he must be mad at me. And one time I had said something to him about directing his anger towards me. And he just turned to me. I was about 16, maybe almost 17, and just said, you think I'm mad at you? And I went, because of what the behavior he was exhibiting.
Yeah.
And that's very much my cultural background. My upbringing was, you don't show emotion. I'll give you something to cry about. Then that kind of spun it for me because he was mad at himself.
Yeah.
The whole time that he was going through this, he was mad at himself and frustrated that he couldn't figure things out. And that's why we needed to get some help. But it had nothing to do with it. And so parents, when you're struggling with your kids, they're, other than the disrespect, but that when they're showing emotion, typically has nothing to do with it.
Right. I always tell parents too, like, it's very easy to get caught up in whether how they're demonstrating their emotions or what it is that they're saying and who they're directing it towards. And it's hard for us as parents to hear our children say that they hate us, or that they're mad at us, or they're upset, they don't like us, this, that, or the other. I always try to tell parents, try to listen more to the music and less to the words, more to the music, less to the lyrics. If we get so caught up in the lyrics, the things, what they're saying, rather than the emotion that's driving what they're saying, and speak to that over how they're saying it, that's going to miss an opportunity then to be able to connect with actually what's going on for them.
Right. And actually make a difference in the situation.
Yeah.
Because then again, if you are focused on what they're saying, sometimes how they're saying it, you're making it about yourself again. And you need to hold the space for your kids and really pull your own ego out of that if we're to change the landscape for the young.
Is it?
And so I know that our generation has a little bit of work to do as well.
Sure.
As far as that's not something that's familiar to us. We weren't all parented that way. But here's an opportunity to really impact the generations coming up. We didn't grow up the same way they did.
Right.
And so taking that into consideration, again, is how they're responding or the emotions. It's a completely different world than what we grew up in. So grant them some grace a little bit. And that's true. Because it's very overwhelming, the stimulation. Yeah, we might have got locked out of the house and don't come home until, dinner. But we didn't have all this noise while we were out.
Right.
We were out, getting dirty, playing in the fields. We weren't connected to our phone and what everyone else is doing. And, what I should be doing. Should I be doing that? It just didn't matter. It's like everything was a rumor if you missed a party. And that's fine because you didn't really know.
You didn't really know.
Right. And now it's like real time. You're not at that party. That must feel awful.
Right.
I'm glad I didn't have to experience it.
Absolutely. 1,000%.
I was telling Nate about something about just how we grew up. And he goes, oh, that sounds amazing. If you wanted to go see a friend, you had to go bike right over to their house. Because, we're off limits, but we really use phones.
Right.
It's just like you'd go outside and ride around and hope someone saw you outside and came out to play. And he just thought, I wish we grew up like that.
Right.
And so I thought, oh.
I remember too, when I first moved out here, so I was 2006, I was 22 years old, and I worked a couple, I was going to school, but I was also working a few different jobs to try to be able to pay for school because I was a broke grad student. And I did this job as like educational therapy. So a different brand of therapy where you're teaching kids who might have like specific learning disorders or ADHD or executive functioning challenges. And I was doing a lot of home-based work at that time. And I was in Brentwood, and I was talking to this child I was working with, and he's like, I've got a play date coming up with so-and-so. I was like, what is a play date? Like, that's true. Oh, well, on Saturday at 2:00, my mom's going to take me over there, and we're going to play together for a couple hours. And I was like, wait a second, you have to schedule these sort of things to actually hang out? I think some of that, too, is like geographically then, too, sort of where we are now. And it is harder to get to places sometimes, but like you have to have like intentional scheduled play dates to be able to hang out rather than just going outside, as you said, riding your bike and hoping you see somebody that you know.
Mhm. Yeah. It was whenever the kids were outside, and we were in an area where there were a lot of kids. So I am grateful for that.
Yeah.
But even my kids, there were still kids, the neighbor kids, they were fine. They'd go out and play. So they grew up that way a bit. And then as you get older, you start gravitating towards your people.
Yeah.
You got to set it up. I think that's where sports comes in for my kids. And there was not just their people, but there was their sports community people.
Yes.
And then there were the school people. So they had these different groups, but they didn't have to be with the same kids all the time, which was more like when they grow up. This is like, that's what it is.
Right.
So they get a chance to have different focuses of the activities that they're doing. But I do think kids are overstimulated in general. I don't think that's helping.
Yep.
You've worked with young men across different cultures and settings. How did your own journey from competitive athletics to international work in Shanghai shape the way you approach these issues?
Right. So I'll maybe speak a little bit to my journey then too. So as I think I already mentioned previously, I grew up in a small town in central Illinois. I moved around a lot as a little kid, but from about 7 years old on, I grew up in like this 23,000 person town. Then I go to college in Northwest Indiana on the soccer scholarship, and I'm playing D1 soccer there. And again, another small town of maybe 26,000 people. Valparaiso, Indiana, Valparaiso University. And then all of a sudden I move out for grad school to Southern California. Right? And so you can see where like one day I'm living in Valparaiso, and then 2 weeks later, Cindy Crawford standing in front of me at the frozen yogurt place at Malibu Yo by Brennan's campus. And I go, what is going on right now? Right. And so then fast forward when my wife and I had met then too. Now she's half Australian, half Taiwanese. Her family business, which was started in Australia, had its headquarters based in Shanghai. And so when we got married, she had been called upon to take over the day-to-day operations. So her parents had retired. We were engaged. I was finishing a postdoc, and she went over to Shanghai to take over the family business. So we're planning this wedding from opposite sides of the world and commuting back and forth. And then we moved there at the end of September of 2014 and lived there for about 8 years. It was fun till it wasn't, especially COVID playing a wrinkle in that too. But as you can see, my world just kept getting bigger and bigger. And now we're moving backwards. I don't think I will ever leave Southern California. You certainly won't find me back in 24,000 person small town in the Midwest, although I love it and I'll go back and visit at least once or twice a year, but just really not for me. I think this is where we've settled. But there's this other layer. This is a very roundabout way to answer your question here. But yes, I was a competitive athlete. As we said, like sports was not only gave me like a space to be able to like connect with other people, it also gave me a space to feel special because I was particularly good at one sport and I felt really good about being the soccer guy at the school that I went to. And that gave me a sense of identity and purpose. And then also, I struggled with different things growing up. There was conflict in my home then too, and amongst different people and different folks within the home. And sports gave me a reprieve from that. It was great. On the one hand, you might call it a quote unquote healthy coping mechanism, but it was also a place for me to escape because when I was there doing that and immersing myself in that, I could shield myself from all the background noise that was happening in other aspects of my life. And so play competitively, try to then play professionally upon graduation, didn't end up working out, injuries stacked up, and I got cut. It was a simple fact that I'd run my course. I'd reached my ceiling as to what level I could play at. And so I said, I guess I'll go become a doctor in psychology instead. And so then come out to Southern California, continue to try to play competitively and just seeing if I can catch on with different teams and still play at that kind of pro-am level. End up getting hurt a few more times, a few more surgeries. And I go, okay, I think soccer's done for me. All right. And that was really around the time in my mid-20s where I really started to engage in the therapy process. And a large part, this goes back to what we started talking about. My identity was so wrapped up in being a competitive athlete, so wrapped up in being a soccer player. I was fairly good at school, had a pretty solid group of friends. I had I had relationships and dating relationships growing up, but so much of it was wrapped up in who I was as athlete first, everything else second, that once that had reached its fill and I was done, it was like, to the name of the podcast, like, who am I now? And a lot of my therapy in my mid-20s was around trying to understand like what soccer served for me, what it meant for me in terms of identity. And then now that that's not in my life, really coming to understand who am I, what do I struggle with, what do I need, and what do I want to be when I grow up, which is funny that question asked at 26, but it's still a necessary question.
It's still starting to fully develop at 26. That's a good time to address it.
Right. And then also, like when I had first come out, I thought I wanted to do sports psychology. There weren't a lot of opportunities, this again, 20 years ago, there weren't a lot of opportunities for like sports psychology internships. It was just really becoming a concept like on college campuses and in specialty clinics then too. And the more I moved away from my own competitive playing career, the more I realized that's not really what I want to do at all. If I'm not competing, if I don't have that identity, and I really don't want much to do with it whatsoever.
Do you think in the beginning of that, it was a way to hold on to that sports identity?
1,000%. 1,000% then too, where, I graduated with three other seniors, so 4 including me. And some of these guys are my best friends to this day. And I thought, I'm going to be the guy who's involved with soccer for the longest. Like I had one friend who was studying biology and he was exploring what he wanted to do with that. I had another friend who was becoming an engineer, which Valparaiso was a big engineering school. And then I was wanting to keep playing and, everything else could sort of be put on pause. I was the guy who actually ended up leaving the sport the earliest. So like the engineer continues to coach club soccer. The friend who was studying biology and chemistry is now the youth goalkeeper instructor for the Colorado Rapids. So the academy also helps to facilitate a lot of their international recruiting then too. So he has literally made a career around the sport, and that's what he does. For me, I put so much on this part of the sport that once that was gone, I was like, I don't know what to do. It was almost like a bad divorce in a way.
Yes.
Too. A bad breakup from something that was so much a part of me that was not a part of me anymore. That where do I go now with that? And I do still work with a lot of young competitive athletes, high school age or college age, who are maybe going through similar sort of identity struggles. And a lot of my discussion with them is about trying to nurture all the different parts of you beyond just who you are as a competitive athlete. Because fact of the matter is, the percentage of people who make a career out of that is very, very small. And even then, those who do, a lot of times they might struggle because so much of their identity is around who they are as an athlete. And so if things are going good, great, you're on top of the world. But if you're having a hard time or you're struggling and you're getting cut or you're going through a slump, then you just feel terrible because you haven't taken the time to be able to nurture a lot of the other parts of you and try to keep those up as well as what it required of you to be a competitive athlete at a high level.
Well, I liken that to trying to build your foundation of who you are.
Yep.
And who you are part of the things that make you a good athlete.
Yes.
But an athlete is not who you are. Eye-hand coordination, laser focus, determination, grit. Those are all partly, they're like inherently who you are, which makes you a very good athlete, but that's not who you are. So trying to separate that from the labels,
right?
I think is really important for young kids, especially as they're getting a little older. They might not be the star anymore, or it might not be a viable direction for them at some point. I see a lot of the hockey kids going through that.
Sure.
It's very strange in hockey where they know they're college to play right out of high school.
Right.
They go down to juniors for 3 years. And there's various levels of juniors, and very few of those end up at D1 or D3. But they're going in at college freshmen at like 21.
Yeah.
And I've got kids that are still trying to hold on at 23. And, maybe I'll go play in Europe. I try to let them realize that the very things that make them a good athlete or a good hockey player, that's who you are. So you can take that and apply that to other areas of your life because that's where the growth is.
Absolutely. And I always say to a lot of the young competitive athletes that I work with that are either see their career waning or they've come to an end altogether, is being a competitive athlete at a high level taught me how to do hard things. And there's so many things that I take from those experiences that I apply to every other aspect of my life. So it's not like once this is done, then it was all for naught because you didn't reach some apex or level that you were hoping to strive for. There's still a lot of great things that you gain from this experience that you can apply in all these different other avenues of your life and help to be successful, however you choose to define that, in a different capacity.
And I think that's actually what sports are for.
Yes.
In the bigger picture, it's the learning how to win and the lose and
Play nicely with others.
Just to figure out who you are in that field, where your contribution is if you're playing a team sport. All of those things apply to the next phase of life.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just not about the physical strength. Well, that's nice to have too, because then I'm building muscle memory for as you get older, because it's a little down. So keep that muscle memory up. Now here, it's harder to maintain, for sure. All right, here's a good question.
Okay.
When you look back at your younger self, is there something you wish you had heard or learned that might have changed your path?
I think this is the very reason I got into being a psychologist, because we all get this question. It's like, hey, how did you decide you wanted to become a therapist or a psychologist or whatever it might be? And we all love giving that really PC answer, which is, oh, I gave good advice. People felt comfortable talking to me. I like helping people. All those things are true. The part that we don't talk about so much is maybe we've been through some really tough stuff along the way, and we were struggling with that really tough stuff along the way and didn't feel like we had anybody that we could really talk to about it. So we just stomached it and went through it, and how painful that was then too. Like, grin and bear it, work your way through it, but it's not as if that goes anywhere. Your body carries that with you. And, I knew that I wanted to be in this sort of profession to be able to support young people who might be having similar struggles. So I think for me, and I don't know if I would have listened to myself at the time, but I think for me, it was like, I probably would have told myself, it's okay to be having a hard time. It's okay to feel like you're not good enough. Like, I was so wrapped up in this idea that I had to hide if I was having a hard time, or I had to hide if I was struggling in this way or that way, and that I couldn't talk to other people about it because nobody could possibly understand what it is that I'm going through. And even if they did understand, they were probably going to think less of me because I was talking about it, and they might think that I'm weak in some regard. I had a supervisor in my mid-20s around that really critical time where there's a lot of shifts in my life, both professionally, personally, romantically, where, I was talking with her and she talked about this idea of vulnerability. And she had said, like vulnerability and masculinity, and how those two concepts are maybe at odds with one another, but how they can coincide as well. And what she had said was that being vulnerable, being able to talk about like the hard parts, being able to talk about the things that you're struggling with, is by no means a sign of weakness. It's actually one of the most powerful and strong things that you can do, to not hide behind the things that you're good at or that you're capable of, or things that you quote unquote have together, and put those other things aside and hope that nobody finds them out. It's being able to say, no, here's what I'm good at. Here's what I like about myself. Here's what I struggle with. Here's where I'm struggling, and being able to actually like embrace that and acknowledge that and ask for help when you needed it.
Vulnerability is one of the strongest traits of masculinity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And to extend the sports analogy, now I was a left-footed player, very left-footed. All right. And in high school, I could get away with that, where the teams would be like, hey, just make him go right, make him go right. Well, I was bigger, stronger, faster than you, that even if you had that game plan in place, I was going to go to my left and I was going to get there anyway. As a result, I never developed the other side of my body. I never developed being able to be a real, true two-footed player. And I didn't have to. And I also was so terrified of the idea of not being good.
As good on the right as you on the left.
Yeah, right.
I'll just stay over here.
Yeah, just stay over here. And people will say how great I am and how good I am at this and that and the other. And I didn't take care of that part. And I hid behind this, right? Get to college where everybody's bigger, faster, stronger, especially at a Division I level, that's going to get exposed. Then too. That's where it absolutely was, and that's where my ceiling was. And a lot of that was like, to use the metaphor, like I was so afraid of being vulnerable, of being quote unquote weak, even though those two terms are not synonymous. Like I maybe once thought they were, that I would hide behind the things that I was capable of and that I was good at and I was confident in, and as a way to kind of shield the things that I might have been struggling with. That goes for sports, that goes for life, that goes for relationships, that goes for my emotions. That was a big undoing process, particularly in that critical juncture in my life, in my mid-20s there.
And understanding when you acknowledge, accept, and put on the table the things that you're vulnerable about. Now there's an opportunity to grow into that. Had someone nurtured you and saying, we got to work on your right side so that you're balanced, not because it's weak, so that you're a powerhouse. If we reframe it differently so that the vulnerabilities that our kids are facing, it becomes growth and strength and unstoppable. Maybe if we can lean into it in that way a little more in our own struggles, and like I said, sharing our own struggles with our kids, it gives them space to lean into theirs and to reframe it not as weakness, but as an opportunity for growth.
Right. And being able to start that conversation with them, because it's not as if I didn't have a lot of well-intentioned and well-meaning and supportive people around me growing up. My parents were wonderful during my growing up period, but they didn't know how to ask me if I was having a hard time. And they didn't know how to, I don't want to speak for them, especially since they're not here, but that was kind of the general sense that I got, that they knew that I was struggling. I wasn't talking about it. I think their thought was, if he's not bringing it to us, we don't want to shed light on it either. So we just hope that he kind of works his way through this. If someone had said in different ways, like, hey, what's really going on? How you really doing? I think that might have led to a different outcome.
Yeah, and then listen instead of try to solve.
Yeah.
Let it come out, because all the emotions are going to come out with the word.
Right.
Just hold space.
Right.
And in the end, you could say, what are you going to do about it? Or how do you feel now? Has nothing to do with making a decision to move forward. It's just an expression. My thing is the body awareness. So all the bodies, the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies, they're all one. They all dance with each other all the time. And so by allowing someone to express emotion and finding their words, it relieves the mental anxiety. It relieves the physical injuries that you're holding in your body because it's so tight. It allows your soul to come out.
And it makes me think about sometimes if I had continued to pursue that path of doing sports psychology, like I know that there's a lot of sports psychologists who will work more group-based and do like team building, and there's more like performance-focused exercises. But I feel like if I had continued to pursue that path, I don't think it would look terribly different from what I do now in my private practice, because so much of what's happening on the field and what's going well and what's not going well has so much to do with what's on the other side of the sideline, and then vice versa too. You know, how if things aren't going well here, that doesn't need to be taken off the field over here. You know, if things aren't going well here, let's pull those things apart, try to sort through them so you can feel free to be who you are out here.
Because if you're not doing that background work, it bleeds over on the field.
1,000%.
Whether it's in your concentration, your ability to process information fast, because you've got other things going on. I agree with you 100%. So with your mix, the mix of the personal experience you have and your professional insight, what do you see as the most effective ways to turn things around for young men?
Okay. I think that there's a couple different things. One, we want to give we want to give young men, adolescents, particularly adolescent boys, the idea that they're doing the best they can. I think so many times we just criticize the symptom rather than really looking at their ways of coping as the only way that they know how, and they're doing their best. And this is what's working for them, even if it might not be working for other people, and trusting that they have the ability within them to try to work through things and trying to meet them where they're at. I think that's something that's really important. You may not agree with the words that they're saying. You may not agree with the way that your child is conceptualizing things. And you may want to be jumping in so quickly to tell them, you're wrong about this, that, and the other. You're seeing this, that, and the other the wrong way. Children will then stop bringing things to you because they'll go, not only am I having a hard time, but you don't understand it either. All right. So trying to do that perspective taking, trying to put yourself in the mind frame and in the experience of your child, connecting back to when you were your child's age and maybe struggled with something similar, but maybe in different ways, and trying to think about it from that perspective. And I think too, like letting, and this is a message that we have to say over and over again, is that even though therapy and mental health support has become even more and more readily accessible, there's still that notion and that stigma that things have to be really bad for me to go to therapy. I have to be really messed up in the head. I have to be crazy for me to go to therapy, when that most certainly isn't the case at all. Generally speaking, I know this was my experience by which I engaged in therapy. And then also with a lot of people that I work with, there's like a precipitating event or events that bring them into therapy in the first place. We might talk about that for like 2 to 3 sessions, and then that's resolved itself. And there's so much more underneath that what the therapy actually becomes about. So knowing like you don't have to be at a total breaking point to be able to seek out support from the adults that are already in your life, or the peers that are already in your life, or specific support from a therapist to actually benefit from the process.
Absolutely. I have a story about a perception of not listening to what the child's reality is. And it wasn't that long ago. Lucy came home from her second year of college, and she was going to be home for the summer. And I could just tell she was off, and she was angry. And she'd been kind of angry all the way up to that point, from about junior, senior year up. So we were in a room, and I kind of said, Liz, what's up? Like, there's just this underlying anger. And is it towards me? Is this just your life? I kind of want to make it about me. I don't know why. She turned around and said, I don't feel like you were present for me my senior year of high school. And I immediately got affected. Because you guys know me. I feel like I'm totally present. I'm very aware. And so I was immediately offended. The first thing I said to her, I'm sorry you feel that way. And I walked out of her room. And I caught myself, did the pause, took a breath, turned around, walked right back in, sat on the floor because she was on the bed so she could be higher level. And I just looked her in the eyes and I said, I am sorry if I wasn't present for you in any way. And you know what it did? It opened up this conversation that we had not only about that. For the first time, I think she felt like I'm owning whatever I didn't do. And if I don't know what I did do, it opened up this whole conversation. And the whole summer she'd been home of her trusting me that I wasn't going to say her feelings weren't her feelings, or they weren't real. They were real to her. And I was able to then talk at different times about what I was going through, or the struggles that I was going through during her senior year, and could relate that to, I could see how it didn't feel like I was present for you. And just own it. If that was her experience. I think a lot of parents, we don't want to do that.
Right.
Because we think we're doing the best we can. Well, they're also 15, 16, 17, 20. They're not supposed to know. They don't know what life is like at our age at that different time as well. So we got to grant them some grace and not take things so personally. Because if in that moment I had made that about myself, she probably wouldn't talk to me all summer, and we actually wouldn't be as close as we are today, because I know that was actually a complete turning point for our mother-daughter relationship, and we are extremely close now. So that just a little real life story. One moment of you stepping back and really engaging, even if you think you already are. I think I'm a super parent, clearly not all the time. It makes a huge difference in the trajectory of not only your relationship, but their life, how they feel about themselves, their worth. Right?
Right. And if we want our kids to be able to like be vulnerable and actually work through and talk through what they may be struggling with, we as parents really need to be able to model that for them. And if we shut down a conversation too quickly, or say that you're wrong, or that you're this or that, and we don't open it up and say, tell me where I went wrong. Like, allow for me to be vulnerable and hear some honest feedback and thoughts from you about what that experience was like for you, so I can tell you a little bit about maybe what I was going through, what my experience was, or even to say, yeah, that was wrong and I'm sorry. I knew it at the time that it was wrong, but I was so hell-bent on going through it and sticking to it because I thought that it was justified or necessary or whatever it might be. But even going through it, it didn't feel good. It didn't feel good for me, so I know it didn't feel good for you, and I'm sorry about that.
Huge connection right there.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to own, saying sorry, but really saying sorry.
Yep.
I messed up.
Yep.
It eliminates all the anger that they have towards you immediately because you just owned it. And even if it was just a part of it, you don't have to always bow down to your kids and, oh, I'm sorry. That's the other end of the spectrum, right?
Right, absolutely.
But creating that connection, the way you create connection through all relationships is through vulnerability. That's what makes it so strong. That's what makes it a strength. And so I hope we can start reframing that vulnerability is not weak.
Right.
It's the most courageous thing that you can be in that moment.
Absolutely.
You're saying that a lot of your clients right now are young men in that 18 to 35, 40 age group. When you see young men make real progress, what made the difference?
One, they self-referred to be there. That's obviously a good start. Two, I think it's been side given the research, we say all over and over again that the relationship with the therapist makes a significant difference. If I feel really emotionally connected to you because maybe I've allowed myself, even as the therapist, to be vulnerable in that space with you, and it's giving you permission to then be vulnerable with me then too, and to know too, we call them corrective emotional experience. It's like, if you take that step where you go, okay, this is what I'm struggling with, not only this is what I'm struggling with, but this is where it comes from, and really start to unpack it in the room with me and show that bravery and courage to be able to, because it's a hard thing for any of us to do. But if you can work through that with me in the room and know that I'm not going to judge you for it, I'm not going to think differently of you for it. In fact, I'm going to try to help to normalize it for you, to validate what it is that you're going through, and to help you see that it no longer has to be that way anymore. So that's part of it, being able to build a connection, to be able to demonstrate vulnerability in the room, to be able to get to that point in our relationship. And that's just as much, if not more, on me than it is the person sitting across from me, that I give them the space to know that they can do that. And then also, I think then the final tipping point too is like starting to own what our responsibility is and things too. Taking responsibility, taking accountability. That's not to say that this is all your fault, but it is to acknowledge and to say, I played a role in this. I played a role in this is how I dealt with it in the past. And it might have been helpful for me in the past. My old ways of dealing with my life's problems or my relationships are not working in the same way. And that part's on me. And I can look at myself and I can acknowledge, I can be vulnerable with myself to say, this was hard and this is how I've been dealing with it. And maybe this isn't working out the same way and I'm ready to try something different.
Excellent. For parents who realize they've missed some opportunities to help their son develop these skills, where do they start now?
We talk about like critical periods for language development or for writing and this and that and those early childhood periods. I think of adolescence more as like a sensitive period, not a critical period where it's fixed. And if you don't develop that ability now, then you'll never get it. It's much more of this sensitive period where children will tend to be more sort of emotionally labile. They may struggle with things in different ways. And you might have done it, quote unquote, wrong in the past, or maybe you did miss those opportunities to connect, but the opportunity is never lost altogether. I've always said ruptures are going to happen, and conflicts and misunderstandings are going to happen. That's just part of life. You're going to miss the boat with your kids sometimes, but it's always about the repair. If you can come back, you can own it, you can talk about it, you can show them what it's like to be vulnerable, you can model that for them, then that gives them the space to be able to repair, and that can actually make the relationship deeper too. Like the example you gave with your daughter, there was the rupture there. Some of it, even unbeknownst to you, that she then felt the courage to be able to share that with you. All right. You guys repaired that. You guys worked through that. And as you said, the relationship is perhaps stronger than it's it's ever been. And in fact, yes, we would have liked for the rupture to have not happened in the first place, but might I suggest that the relationship could be even stronger because the rupture and the repair happened in the first place.
And so to be able to allow that to happen, parents need to find humility and vulnerability. So to really be able to step out of your own identity crisis and ego issues and just be raw in front of your kids appropriately for their age and their relationship.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the missing link.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would agree.
And to know too that the goal is, parents say this goal to me a lot. Like when I ask them at the end of the first intake session, what's your goal for your child in therapy? They say, well, I just want them to be happy. And of course, right? That's what we all want. We would all like to be happy, but gosh, what a lot of pressure to have to be happy all the time. And if you're not happy, then there's something wrong with you. And if you are happy, then you're okay. That's not the truth at all, because that's not the totality of anybody's experience. We're going to struggle with things at times. Sometimes it's okay to not be okay. That's not a judgment of like if you're good or if you're bad. To be able to tolerate even when your child is unhappy or your child is struggling, and to not say that that's a sign that there's something wrong with them, but that's a sign that they're human trying to figure out where their place is in this world.
I don't like the term happy because it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
Everybody's definition, was that supposed to be you're jovial and jumping around all day? Is that I like to use the word peace. And so if your child can find their baseline of peace, I'm good. They're going to go up, great. They come back down because that's not their ego marker.
Yeah.
They go down, they have the tools to be able to come back up and regulate. So I don't like to use the word happy because to me, that's a feeling. It's a fleeting moment. But if you have this calmness about you, the calm, the peace, that is a baseline that you'll return to time and time again. If we're striving for happiness, well, what's your definition of happiness?
And where's the space for when you feel angry or when you feel sad?
Is that just wrong?
Right.
Happy is good. Or anything else on the negative side of feelings is wrong. And we need to normalize like wrong. It's not wrong. It's just the spectrum of feelings. They're all okay. It's how you deal with them. How do you find your baseline? How do you work through them and move on with your day? So what are the mistakes well-meaning parents are making? And what should they do instead?
I think part of it is this myth of if they're happy, they're good. And if they're not happy, they're bad. There's something wrong with them. Right? Trying to be able to tolerate the whole gamut of the emotions and letting them know then too, you can bring all of your feelings to me, not just the happy ones. I think also this comes back to the idea like if they're struggling, that's okay. If they're feeling anxious about something, that's okay. I think especially when we talk about anxiety, I see this a lot with school anxiety, where maybe their child is struggling or having a hard time and they go, well, let's take a mental health day, or let's take a mental health week, or let's take a mental health semester. And I'm going, guys, it's okay to give them space, but they then start to pair that because I'm anxious about something means I shouldn't do it.
I should check out.
I should check out. I should avoid. And as a result, like they end up avoiding life altogether. For parents, like knowing that when our child is anxious, it's okay to feel that. That's not a sign that you run in the other direction. That's actually a sign that your body, your brain is preparing for something that you care about and something that can be challenging, and reinstilling the belief in you that you can do that. You're capable of that. There's a great book, I'm listening to it, but it's called 10 to 25. It's called The Science of Motivating Young People. It's by a guy named Dr. David Yeager, and he's a social psychologist and focuses primarily on like children and young adults. And he talks about how to remotivate young people in today's day and age. And he talks a lot about this mindset with which we approach raising our young people. All right. And there's the enforcer that says, I need you to do this, 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 and that. And if you haven't done it by this time, or if you've done it wrong, then there's something wrong with you. All right. High expectations, low support. On the other side of the axis here, we've got the protector that says, that was really hard for you. I don't think you need to do that. Why don't you come on over here? We don't have any expectations for you. I want to just take care of you, stay in your safe space here. And they're both just half of the puzzle. We want to have expectations of our children because that communicates to them that we believe in them and that we believe that they're capable of meeting those expectations so they can start to develop that belief within themselves. But we also want to say, I'm here in the boat rowing with you. I'm going to be there to support you along the way. I'm not going to do it for you, but I'm not going to leave you all alone either. So trying to have the balance of both of those, which can be a challenge. And oftentimes I'll see parents tend to fall on one or the other. And sometimes those roles might be reversed between the two parents, depending on time and circumstance. But trying to hit that sweet spot of both protector and enforcer to be a true sort of mentor in your child's life.
The point of being the enforcer and the mentor on that midline is so that the child can develop their own sense of navigation and their own sense of, I can do hard things.
Yeah.
Just like little kids, when they fall, they always look at their parents first to see if they should cry. This is the same thing. If they know you're right there, and it's not that, oh, we don't cry. It's, yes, that was hard. But you don't always have to automatically go to, oh, do we need to go to the doctor?
Right.
Because the kids will then start reacting how they anticipate their parents' belief systems are about that.
Right.
So when we don't push our kids or say, you can do this, you can do the hard things. I know you're completely anxious about it, and that's healthy. Versus, oh, okay, maybe you're not ready. Inherently, you're telling your kid, I don't think you could do it.
Right.
That's what they interpret, even if that's not the case.
Right.
And it doesn't mean you throw them out there without a net and just hope they can swim either. So yes, it's finding that balance and being able to read your child, knowing the baseline of your child, and being able to read how high up they're going in that anxiety. Is it down here? Can we get it down here? So that they can start having some self-confidence. But if they're already spinning out, it might be a very different conversation.
Right. And the playground analogy is a great one. I use it oftentimes in therapy too, especially when I'm doing the parent-focused work, because I often will tell parents, like, okay, your goal for your child is to better be able to regulate their emotions, to not get too angry or too sad or too overwhelmed. And the truth of the matter is, though, children learn regulation through co-regulation. They learn in the context of relationship. All right. So you are the barometer by which the child will be able to start to be able to internally regulate. So if you're not pairing with them during that process in those early stages, if you're not modeling for them what that looks like, and even when you think your kids aren't watching how you regulate your own emotions, they're always watching.
They're always
all right. So if you're not, one, regulating yourself in your own life, if you're not, two, helping your child to co-regulate, that child will then really struggle with the ability to be able to independently regulate as they age, because maybe that space was not held for them, or maybe they didn't have healthy models by which to do that.
Okay. If you could give one piece of advice to every parent of a teenage boy or young man, what would it be?
I think it goes back to that thing I mentioned about the Goldilocks approach, where we need to find it just right. Like, if we want to help our children learn how to regulate their emotions, how to figure out what it is that they want in their lives, how to work towards that, we want to be able to model for them how to deal with hardship, how to deal with conflict, how to deal with relationships, how to deal with emotions. If we become so overwhelmed by that, we don't set healthy models for that, our child will never gain that ability. They will just repeat what it is that we're doing. If we get overwhelmed by it in front of them, that overwhelms them. If we hide it from them entirely, then that doesn't give them a lesson or a benchmark either, because we're not modeling for them how to do it. All right. So, it comes back to that idea, like, if we're not setting healthy models for our children about how they can work through things and work through hard things and work through conflict and relationships, they will not gain that ability. And so I think I also mentioned that too, about kids always watching, right? We get so frustrated with kids when they're not doing what we say, all right? Or they're not listening to what we say. You want to keep in mind, your child will do a quarter or a half of what you're telling them to do, but they'll very likely do most of the things that you're doing, for better or for worse. So not to feel like you can't be your own person in the world, but to think of it like, as you go about your life and how you carry yourself as a parent, have this idea in your head that your child has the Life 360 on you at all times, just like you have it on them all the time. All right. And that they're picking up on these things and how you're dealing with your own adversities in your life. And they're learning through that twice as much as what it is that you're telling them. Do as I say, not as I do. No, you need to have them do as you do, and set a good, healthy model for how to do.
So you're telling parents to do their own work.
Most definitely. Yeah. And it's a hard thing.
Work.
Mm-hmm.
And you will become a much, I don't want to say better parent, but a much more relatable. The connection will be true. You got to do your work.
Right. And again, you're asking earlier, what are the markers of like therapeutic success for your child or adolescent? When I have parents who are actively engaged in the therapy process, who are willing to do the adjunctive parent work and keeping open lines of communication with me, that will greatly increase the likelihood that they will have a successful therapeutic experience. And then also too, for those parents, you go back to the idea of doing your own work, getting your own help then too. If you might be struggling with something that is then permeating into your relationship with either your spouse or with your child, you being able to have your space to be able to take care and work through that is going to be necessary, because otherwise it most definitely will bleed into that relationship. And I speak as a therapist, and I'll say, you never want to see someone in therapy who has not done their own therapy. If you've got a therapist who's never been through therapy or doesn't feel like that they need it, that's not the person for you, because they don't know what it's like to be vulnerable on the other side of the chair. And then also, they haven't worked through their own stuff.
Right.
And if they haven't worked through it, there's going to be blind spots in the therapy room, and their stuff is going to get in the way of helping you work through your stuff.
It's projection.
Yeah.
Versus, okay, maybe your space. I think as parents, we do that too.
Sure.
We can project onto our kids our own insecurities. It doesn't mean we don't think that they can do it, but we're terrified we've done something wrong and we haven't set them up for success. And it bleeds over into the kids thinking they're not enough. So really working with your own vulnerabilities as, however you feel as a parent, as a person, as a human, makes a big difference in how your kids pick up on you as a parent.
When you see your child do the things that you don't like about yourself, and you go, oh,
the mirror, man.
Oh my gosh. Oh, like I'm very grown up, small town, Midwest, very time oriented. Early is on time and on time is late. My wife, Australian, I'll get there when I get there. There's obviously a clash of culture and like some mentality around that then too. And I will get visibly nervous if we're not out the door. I know there's a lot of like memes and Instagram reels out there about the dads who are getting to the airport 4 hours early and like checking in and checking the flights. And I totally get that. That's me 1,000%. But when I see my child getting visibly anxious about, maybe it doesn't have to do with time, but about anything, and I see him kind of start to spin, I go, oh, that's my stuff. And it's coming through. And I didn't think that I was modeling that for you, but I most certainly am, in ways that maybe even weren't readily available to me, that I was cognizantly aware of. So that is more work I need to do on myself to be able to come to peace with that, so I can set, not only for my own sake, but also to set a good model for my child.
I agree. There are mirrors almost in every way. So if you, I don't want to say if you don't like the behavior of your child, but you'll see your stuff show up very early on, and then it becomes their stuff as it grows, and they put their relationships and their friendships in with it. Yeah, if you see something you don't like, look at yourself first. That would be my extra advice. Okay, so if you could speak directly to every young man listening, right? What's the one message you want them to hear?
It is as cliche as it might sound, like it's okay to not be okay. You don't have to hide those vulnerable parts of you. I think that we have baked into our young people this message that the way you deal is by hiding. And I think we've done a real disservice. Now, I think it's particularly prevalent in the sports culture. And I know that, yes, there's a time where you're out there performing, you got to keep a few things on the sideline and just push through. But with that being said, like, that doesn't always translate, especially when it comes to more tender parts of your life. And you don't have to hide those away from the world or to think that you're the only one going through them. And there's a lot of other people who might be struggling with things that are similar to you. And we want to try to normalize that. We want to try to normalize, more importantly, the ability to be able to talk about it and to share that with somebody, so you're not carrying that burden around all by yourself.
Excellent. Today's conversation is a reminder that the numbers aren't just data. They reflect the lived reality of our young men in our homes, classrooms, and communities. Mental health challenges are rising. Fewer men are pursuing higher education, and too many are stepping back from the very spaces where confidence, skills, and connections are built. The result is a generation spending most of their formative years in isolation. But as Dr. Nate reminds us, this story doesn't have to end here. With strong modeling, open conversations, and the right support, boys and young men can learn the emotional tools they need to thrive, not just survive. If you're raising a son, mentoring a young man, or reflecting on your own journey, start small. Choose connection over correction. Ask questions. Listen. Keep showing up because presence matters more than perfection. You'll find the links to Dr. Nate's work in our show notes. Explore his approach and see how it might help you or someone close to you. Our shift has ended for today, but yours continues. Think of one young man in your life who needs to hear that he matters, and reach out. Even the smallest act of connection can change the course of a life. See you next week.